Good Shabbos. This week's portion is Tazria Mitzorah, but it's also an important day on the Jewish calendar. Yesterday, we celebrated Yom Ha'atzmaut, the Independence Day of Israel. And in actuality, the day that it's really supposed to be celebrated is Hey Iyar, the 5th day of the month of Iyar, the Jewish month of Iyar, which is tonight and tomorrow, which is in Shabbos. But the rabbis in Israel made sure to establish the celebration of the day on a day where there wouldn't be any desecration of Shabbos, and therefore they didn't even have it on a Friday because it would lead into Shabbos. So when it came out on Shabbos, it's moved to Thursday. So we're right in between the celebration of the day and the actual day that it occurred. And I'd like to discuss sort of my own sort of journey through the years of becoming what I would consider a Zionist. Because in my earlier years, I studied in yeshivas where Zionism was really not talked about that much. If it was, there were some people who were very negative about Zionism because it's a secular movement rather than a religious movement. But in most cases, it just wasn't discussed. And when Israel Independence Day would occur, I don't think we were made even aware of it all the years that I was in these yeshivas. So I wouldn't say that grew up as an anti-Zionist, but rather as a non-Zionist. My father, in a sense, had a similar background. He came from a religious family, studied in the same types of yeshivot that I studied in. And it was a little bit more hotly debated in that time. When he was in yeshiva in the late 40s, of course, he was there when Israel declared independence. He once told me a story how he was at a wedding, I believe it was in 1948, and at the wedding became sort of a battle, somewhat physical, throwing food. I don't know if anyone was hurt, between the two sides over Zionism. So it was hotly debated at that time, and one of the heads of the yeshivas, Rav Feivel Mendelovich, I think, of my father's yeshiva, was somewhat sympathetic. And there were many rabbis in the what you'd call the Haredi world or the yeshiva world in America, which were sympathetic to Zionism, but not that openly Zionistic. And there were many people who were more strongly opposed. Even today, there's a yeshiva in what you'd call in the Haredi world, Panovich, which is almost sometimes compared to the Harvard of yeshivas in Bnei Brak. On Yom Ha'atzmaut, what they do is they have an Israeli flag be raised on the building from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. But I believe in the yeshiva itself, there's no real celebration. There's just that recognition of what you call hakaras hatov, gratitude towards the state of Israel. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the actual dispute, and why should one be a Zionist or not a Zionist, a religious Zionist, a secular Zionist, a cultural Zionist, a socialist Zionist? There's many different types of Zionism. And a brief summary, very brief summary would tell you the following. We know that Theodor Herzl established the idea of Zionism in the modern times. And of course, he was not religious or observant, he was secular. And the movement was highly secular. And as a result, it was seen by the religious, observant, I want to call it Orthodox world, as being a negative force because it was going to move the Jewish people towards secularism. And at that time, socialism, communism was on the rise, and Orthodoxy was losing people to all of these movements. And therefore, it was hotly opposed. Most of that world was hotly opposed. And also, there was a fear that it would not be successful. And we were used to 2,000 years of being an oppressed people and surviving. Right? The focus was on surviving for all those years. No matter what country we were in, no matter what country we found ourselves, we had to leave one and go to the other. We were happy just to be able to live a Jewish life and the Jewish people were successful throughout all the travails, throughout all of history, just surviving and having Jewish life, Jewish community, the study of Torah and religious observance. It was still there to a large degree up to and including 1948, or at least let's say until the beginning of World War II. So it was a fear that the movement wouldn't be successful, and if anything, people could turn against us if we tried to change the status quo. Now there were religious Zionists. Rabbi Yaakov Reines started the Mizrahi movement, which is religious Zionism. Most famously in Israel, Rabbi Kook was the chief rabbi of Palestine, I believe, in about 1935, up until 1935, if I'm getting my dates correct. And he was the father of modern religious Zionism in the state of Israel up to and including today. And it's a very important and large movement in Israel. But the world that, for example, I inhabited was not part of that world. And a lot of the reasons which might have been important back then seem to have fallen by the wayside, because today, no matter how secular Israel is, religious Judaism is alive and well. The study of Torah is far greater in Israel today than it ever has been amongst the Jewish people. Of course, there's a lot of debate going on between the Haredi world and the secular world and the religious Zionist world about the draft and being part of the state. All these are very important questions which have to be discussed. But leaving that aside, Israel is no longer just a secular state. And the fear of religious Jews for losing the religiosity doesn't seem to be a problem anymore. If anything, religious Judaism and even traditionalism amongst those that are not completely observant is on the rise. Things are different. Even going to the army, just touching on that for a moment, you could be religious. They now have a Chashmonaim brigade, which is specific to the Haredi world. It was a Nachal Yehuda brigade also. There's an accommodation to the religious Judaism, and of course the religious Zionists play a large part in the state, in the army, and therefore they are forced to be reckoned with. And even the Haredi world, of course, is involved in the Knesset, and for many years they didn't want to even be a minister in the government, but now they're even a minister. So things have changed to a degree where there doesn't seem to be that fear. And the fear of failure seems to be one which was mistaken. Maybe at the time it was a legitimate fear, but in retrospect, Zionism really saved the Jewish people. There's an idea in the Talmud of that God puts refuah kodem lamaka. He gives the healing or the solution before the sickness or the plague or the problem. It is always there, ready to be found. And of course, the problem, of course, is the Holocaust and the destruction of European Judaism. And the solution was Zionism. And there were already Zionists and Jews who were moving to Israel at that time. But there was no state. And when the state was created in 1948, 3 years after the war, it became a refuge for many Jews. And whereas probably about 95 to 98% of the Jews in the world lived in the diaspora before 48, now it's about 50% of the Jews. So, well, now we're talking about almost messianic redemption, if you think about it. If you look at some of the predictions and the prophets about the time of Mashiach, there's an ingathering of the exile. There's the fact that we have autonomy and that we have control of the land. There's so many things that have happened which seem to be a fulfillment of the prophecies of Mashiach. Now, someone could argue, well, yes, but we still don't have a religious government. We don't have the temple rebuilt. There's too much tension. There's desecration of Shabbos. there's so many problems from a religious point of view in the modern state of Israel. But I'll just quote Maimonides, who very famously discusses Mashiach in the last chapters of his Code of Jewish Law. And he says about, for example, Rabbi Akiva was a supporter of Bar Kokhba, and Bar Kokhba very famously rebelled against the Romans in 132 CE. That rebellion turned into one of the greatest disasters for the Jewish people. But Rabbi Akiva thought that Bar Kokhba was actually Mashiach, and that he was fulfilling some of the prophecies, and that he was hoping that he would be Mashiach, and I believe he even called him Melech Mashiach, King Mashiach. But of course, he was wrong. But at the time, it was right, or at least he felt it was right, and he had a legitimate right to think that that was going to occur. And we are now at the same sort of time in history where we say we have every right to believe that what we're seeing now is the beginning of redemption. And therefore, although the order of what occurs might not be consistent with everything we find in Talmudic and rabbinic literature over the centuries, Maimonides, and I quote, says that all of these and similar matters cannot be definitely known by man until they occur. For these matters are undefined in the prophet's words. In the Hebrew, it's almost like it's hidden in the prophet's words. And even the wise men, like sages, have no established tradition regarding these matters, except their own interpretation of the verses. Therefore, there is controversy among them regarding these matters. Regardless of the debate concerning these questions, neither order of the occurrence of these events or the precise detail are among the fundamental principles of faith. A person should not occupy himself with the Agadot, the stories in the Talmud and homiletics concerning these and similar matters, nor should he consider them as essentials, for study of them will neither bring the fear or love of God. And what he's really saying is, time will tell. But it looks like a lot of these prophecies are being fulfilled. And we've now have autonomy. We have strength. Of course, there's problems. Israel has failed in certain respects. They're still surrounded by enemies. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. But the Jewish people have really not been stronger for thousands of years. And I don't mean just 2,000 years, it's even longer. Because the only time that Jews had autonomy in Israel from a very long time ago was when at the time of Hanukkah, when the Hashmonaim took control for about 100 years. And the kings from that time were not so great. After a little while, they became corrupt. They became violent. They started fighting amongst each other. There were vast problems. But what do? We celebrate Hanukkah. We don't say, oh, it didn't work out so well. Purim, we celebrate because we were saved from destruction by Haman. And there was a battle, yes. We were able to be victorious, and 75,000 of our enemies were killed. But they didn't have autonomy. They were still living under Ahasuerus in the Persian Empire. And a couple generations later, they were able to return to Israel and build the temple, but they were still under Persian domination. Today, yes, we still have to answer to the forces that be, whether it's the United States, United Nations, many powerful countries that we still somewhat depend on. But our autonomy is greater than it's ever been. Our strength is more than could ever be expected. Secretly, we're a nuclear power. We've now been attacked in one of the most horrific attacks we've had, but yet, as we all know, Hamas is decimated, Hezbollah is beheaded, so to speak. Iran is defenseless, and we'll see what will happen. But there's so much strength. We brought back the Hebrew language. And when you go to Israel, and that's one of the things that struck me the first time I went to Israel, only later in life, is I realized that although I was always heard that many people wouldn't speak Hebrew, because Hebrew is Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue, it shouldn't be used in day-to-day language. It's just historically very weak argument. But those same people who were saying you shouldn't speak Hebrew were speaking Hebrew. So the language has been revived. That's in itself a miracle. The people had a place to go. They had a refuge. We're able to fight for our own in our own defense. There are so many things which tell us this is, as we say in the prayer that we say for the state of Israel, the Reishis Tzmichas Gulasenu, the beginning of the blossoming of the redemption. And that phrase was fought over by rabbis, both on the right and the left, because they had many different problems with saying it's the beginning of redemption. And I would only answer that it's at least a hope, at least it's a dream, and it seems to be a fulfillment. It's no different than Rabbi Kiva saying that Bar Kokhba was the king, Mashiach. We could say that we're in the beginning of the time of redemption. And it's safe to say that the Zionist dream started as secular, but now it's blossomed into something which is allowing Jews to have autonomy and control and religious observance and the flowering of Torah. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We pray to God and we work very hard to make sure that that future is secure. But in the meantime, it's fair to say that, at least in my own humble opinion, we should all be Zionists. Have a very good Shabbos.